Hello and welcome to the Meaning Project podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Daniel A. Franz. As always, thank you for this opportunity to bring a little bit of mental health and meaning to your day. For those of you watching on the YouTube, you will notice right away. And for those of you listening on your various podcast platforms, you will notice rather quickly. I am running solo today. That's right, folks. Focusing on the Meaning Project. And well, come on, Viktor Frankl Meaning Academy is close to my heart as well. My good partner, confidant, friend, and co-founder of the Viktor Frankl Meaning Academy, Dr. Baruch Halevi. Look, our schedules just got so busy this week. I think I requested a change of time. He forgot to put it in, and when it was time to podcast, he was already, hey, that's what happens when you're in demand logotherapist and existential analysis, but not in demand enough. That is why we continue our work at the Viktor Frankl Meaning Academy, writing curriculum and designing the upcoming Your Search for Meaning, due to launch in January of 2024. Keep paying attention to this podcast and all my and our social media platforms for an update on that. So excuse me, since I'm running solo today, I figured, hopefully, I don't know, maybe you missed Dr. Dan by himself a little while. Probably not. We all know B and I are pretty good together, and he certainly makes me a better person, a better therapist, a better coach and consultant, and hopefully I do the same for him. But I'll try anyway to go back to the roots of this podcast and just share a little bit with you. I thought maybe some information, just a little bit of insight into my week, and we can spin that into something that hopefully you can take with you into your week. One of the things I've been doing, working on the curriculum for the upcoming Your Search for Meaning, as in a world where you can truly be anything you want to, or at least online you can be. I am officially the Chief Meaning Officer of the Viktor Frankl Meaning Academy. So my duty is to go back into a lot of my previous studies into existential analysis, the psychology of meaning, logotherapy, the history of Dr. Frankl, and all these other textbooks behind me, and pull out what we think will be most helpful for you, the consumer, the client, the meaning seeker, in a run with us for several months of discovering your own meaning. And one of the things I came across as I'm going back to the foundations of Dr. Frankl's logotherapy, is what we call the three pillars, the foundational ideas that logotherapy is founded on. And I believe we've probably gone through this before, but let's go through it again with maybe a different bend to it, because I'm gonna apply it to some things I've been working on this week in the clinical office. So the three pillars, repeat with me if you remember: freedom of will to meaning, and meaning in life, right? Isn't that beautiful how those three just flow together? But if we take them separately, if we look at the history of them, I've been reviewing a lot of the history of psychology and psychotherapy and Freud and Adler and Frankl. And I tell you, it's something I get so excited over. Hopefully you do too, if you decide to work with us in your search for meaning. But the idea that we as human beings have a freedom of will. During Frankl's time, when he came up with these ideas, that was in direct opposition to a lot of the other ideas of the time, that human beings' path is predetermined. That's, I believe, if I remember correctly from years ago, that's deterministic philosophy. That's, we have no free will, that everything that happens to us, every choice we make, is determined by something that has happened to us in the past, by biology, by physiology, by neurology. And Dr. Frankl rebelled against that. He said, no, man truly does have freedom of will. And this has been a great philosophical debate throughout history: determinism versus freedom of will. And if you remember, Dr. Frankl's spiritual history, he was of Jewish descent, a biblical person. In the early days of education in Austria, students got a heavy dose of biblical education. And that idea of freedom of will definitely comes out of both the Christian and Jewish spiritual heritages, and I'm sure many more. So one of the founding premises of logotherapy, of existential analysis, of the psychotherapy and coaching that I share with people is this idea that we have the freedom of will, the freedom to choose. Now, this comes from one of the texts I used several years ago. The point they make is we have the freedom of will within obvious biological, sociological, even psychological limitations to fulfill the meaning of our lives. By doing so, we determine who we become. We have the freedom of will to choose. However, that is not without its limitations. Our biology, our demographics, our sociology, our minds, our brains, our family, all kinds of different variables may limit us. But even within those limitations, we have the freedom to choose every day. Millions of times, I believe, millions, thousands, a lot of times every day. We have freedom of will. As a inspired logotherapist and existential, I mean, how could I not believe this, right? I wouldn't be able to call myself a logotherapist if I didn't believe in this. Now, there are other schools of thought that disagree. In fact, B just texted me earlier this week. I think he was really trying to rile me up. Dr. Robert Sapolsky, biologist out of Stanford, whose work I've used for a long time, who I really respect. He did some amazing research into apes and their social hierarchies and how they impact stress. I remember I used to show a National Geographic back in those days. It was a DVD to the young people I was working with in treatment centers. So again, I've always appreciated his work, but this article, not a fan of, because he says, well, humans have no free will. All of our behaviors are predetermined by pre-existing conditions. I said, so we went back for a while. Actually, I think it was over this weekend. B sent me this. I don't know why he was trying to push my buttons on a weekend, but if you've listened long enough, you know he is pretty darn good at that. But back to the point. Human beings have free will. If you've been listening to this podcast for the past 120 some episodes, you know that's a pretty big, important idea behind what we try to encourage people to do in the Logos philosophy that we espouse. So, pillar 1, freedom of will. Pillar 2, freedom of will. Therefore, we have a will to meaning. And again, this was the contradiction to Freud and Adler, who said we had a will to pleasure and a will to power. Frankl said that, our primary motivation for living is to discover meaning. If we are to be fulfilled, if we find contentment and happiness, it's because we are finding meaning. We are discovering meaning. So from that freedom of will, we have this inherent drive, this inherent motivation to discover meaning. And, dear listener, thank goodness, that we have you to listen, but that you've actually listened to these things, these podcasts, these YouTube videos, and you already know that. You know that there's that scratch, what do we call it with Dr. Elise, that kind of unscratched itch in the back of your mind, that knowledge that, man, I'm looking for something. I'm seeking something. I'm seeking meaning. And you get that. But how many people out there in the world today don't? And they often describe it as anxiety or depression or some kind of personality disorder. So many people out there today. I can think of one individual whom I worked with this week, a young man who's really having a hard time finding his place in life, and is par for the course with a lot of people in this generation, are looking for answers, have too much information in the clinical literature, and therefore are diagnosing themselves or coming to their physicians with a diagnosis, and therefore the physician is prescribing medication, when in my mind, I truly believe there may be some diagnoses there, but what he is suffering from, what I'm reminded of in rereading Frankl's The Will to Meaning, he suffers from a neurogenic neurosis, a neurosis of the defiant human spirit, a blockage in his ability to seek meaning. And have worked with this individual for a long time, I can see a lot of those blockages, and they may take some time to get through some of those obstacles to discovering meaning. Some of those are self-imposed, some imposed by family or work or environment. But as you know, we believe that we can turn those obstacles into achievement, and therefore seek our will ourselves to discover meaning, right? So from our freedom of will, we have a will to meaning, that which pulls us into life to discover meaning. And then, of course, the final pillar is meaning of life, right? When we engage our freedom of will to make meaningful decisions, and therefore we engage our will to meaning, we will find meaning in life. We will discover, ideally, I hope for you and for those listening and those you share this with, that you're able to discover meaning on a daily basis, right? That those meanings of the moments, as well as the ultimate meaning, that connection that we seek with that which is other than us, greater than us, that some of us call God, the universe, whatever it might be. Logotherapy considers it to be ultimate meaning. And there's a great book back there somewhere behind me. Um, the Dr. Frankl, I believe his last published book was Man's Search for Ultimate Meaning, as he was in his older years and knew that death was coming and that his existence was near, his earthly existence was near an end. He talked about his work seeking ultimate meaning. So interestingly, I want to share this kind of in one of my texts from my doctoral studies. There's this beautiful summary of kind of the beliefs of logotherapy. Though, we have those three pillars, freedom of will, will to meaning, and meaning of life. But this is just such a powerful paragraph. I thought I'd share it with you, right? So inherent in these tenets is the conviction that human life has inestimable value. So that's a big premise of logotherapy, that each one of us has unique human value, and that it's purposeful, that each individual is unique and is endowed with innate dignity. My goodness, what a beautiful philosophy just right there, that just sees the goodness of man. And part of that, again, not to continue to contradict Freud, but I'm reminded in my studies of the history of psychology, a lot of Freud's theories were from working with severely mentally ill patients. Today, that those we would say probably had bipolar disorder, some of the most severe diagnoses, or a personality disorder. He worked with the truly ill and therefore formulated his theories from there. Whereas Frankl worked more with healthy individuals that were struggling in their environment post World War One, coming into World War Two, that may have not been as truly mentally ill, but were struggling with these obstacles to discovering life. So you can kind of see where he comes up with this belief that we as humans are valuable, unique, and endowed with innate dignity. We are called to live with authenticity and integrity to fulfill our vocation of destiny, our unique meaning. That's a word I've talked a bit about this week in counseling and consulting. Integrity, that seemed to be a big word. Sadly, we seem to be missing some integrity these days, that we will do what we say and say what we do and be behind that. And so that's an important word, that when we don't behave with integrity, we'll feel it. We'll feel it in our human spirit. We'll feel it in our mind and emotions, and eventually in our bodies. That lack of integrity, if we are endowed with this dignity that begs us to behave with integrity, when we don't, it affects us in a negative way. It's not a mental illness, but it sure can be, as Dr. Frankl says, a neurosis of the human spirit. Life offers opportunities to find meaning in every situation. I know I've said that many times. The task of life is to uncover them, and that is our task for each one of us. Dr. Frankl sees, I love this one. He sees happiness as a byproduct of our search for meaning. Yeah, I've said it before. Happiness, much like success, cannot be pursued. It must ensue as a result of the discovery or meaning. Happiness cannot be pursued directly, as it says here. Rather, it ensues as a result of meaning-centered living. Boy, I don't think we've used that term enough. Meaning-centered living. When you're living a meaning-centered life, right? It's almost like that book back in the early 2000s, The Purpose-Driven Life. I like meaning-centered life. But however, the Viktor Frankl Meaning Academy believes meaning, purpose, and resilience. So they'll go together. They don't compete. They're just different. If you listen to last week's podcasts, you'll hear about that. Happiness cannot be pursued and must ensue from meaning-centered living. This tenet is also echoed. Here he goes, quoting his popular culture. This tenet is also echoed by another notable voice, Helen Keller's. Out of her own experience, she could say with conviction, many persons have a wrong idea of what constitutes true happiness. It is not attained through self-gratification, but through fidelity to a worthy purpose. Wow. I didn't know that was coming, but this is that line is a perfect segue into a little bit about my clinical week. There was one day this week, by the end, my thoughts were somewhere along these lines, and I will censor those thoughts so that I don't have to hit the explicit button on YouTube. The thought goes something like this. My goodness, we are dealing with a lot of addiction in modern times. Now, you may have heard me say before, I do not diagnose addiction. Addiction is not even in our grand Bible of diagnostic and statistical facts for the DSM-5 from the American Psychological Association, right? Addiction is a common term anybody gets to use, and a lot of people do, mostly in the Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, marijuana, in the 12-step programs. But we are seeing today in our increase of study of addiction, substance use and abuse, that, addiction comes in many sad forms, from internet addiction and phone addiction, which is really today manifesting itself. Whenever I have to ask somebody in a couple saying, I just feel disconnected. I'm not, my partner and I will spend time in the same room. I say, wait, they're on their smartphone, right? Well, yeah. How'd you know? Well, what are they doing on their smartphone? And I'm telling you, 95% of the time, they're just scrolling through TikTok, or, now it's Reels and whatever all the other social media has. Um, it I was walking out. So walking out to my car the other day to head into the office, and it was funny. Like literally, it's beautiful fall day. Leaves are falling. You can smell the crisp fall air coming. And I have no idea why this hit me. I said, "Holy cow!" Again, censored there. That's why they call it TikTok. And I thought I was having a flash of brilliance there, but as I've shared it in the past few weeks, it wasn't so brilliant. But I'm like, TikTok, because we spend so much damn time on it. TikTok, our minutes are just ticking away. Our connections are ticking away. But in that ticking away, it is feeding us dopamine, oxytocin, the acetylcholine, the different happy endorphins. But it is feeding it to us in a way that brings us back to those smartphones rather than back to those true human connections and the ones that care about us. And of course, we have substance addiction, alcohol addiction, marijuana addiction. We also, in our days today, pornography addiction has become so prolific. It is one of the biggest industries in the world, a multi-billion-dollar industry, and far too easy to access, right? And so why is that? And I noticed this particularly this week. Don't get me wrong, I'm not being sexist here. I know there are women who struggle with addiction and substance use and abuse and maybe spending and things like that. But this week, I guess a positive and a negative, a lot of men this week, working with a lot of men in recent history who struggle. Why is it today that it seems to be so many men? Well, first of all, for you guys that choose to work with me, to work with us, to work with B, to work with Elise, to come to our Meaning Academy, all of that, man, from the bottom of my heart, congratulations. Good job. So much respect. Because for me, I live in an environment where not a lot of men freely and openly would say, yes, A, I need help, but B, I need psychological help. For those of you that decide to do that, nice job, man. Because I know many of us grew up in environments that were not conducive to that, and we're just now beginning to open up. And I think that's part of the heart of many men's addiction is we are so used to repressing thoughts, feelings, emotions, needs, wants, drives, our desire for meaning. And what is acceptable for us? Well, in some families, apparently, pornography is acceptable. Alcohol is really easy to get through or get to. Marijuana becomes more prolific. Amazon is just a click away. And, go ahead, tell me you don't get a little burst of dopamine when you get on there and you hit that buy button. Woo-hoo, something's coming, and then you get to track it. And then it's going to, you get to see when it shows up, even if it's something as simple as a strap on a duffel bag because the airline lost that strap last time you traveled. I don't know who I might be talking about there, but it might actually be me as I watched that process happen when I had to buy a $7.99 duffel bag strap. It's too easy. And men, because we don't know how to identify emotions, much less express them, very often, we turn to different kinds of addiction to placate that. There are better ways to deal with things. And that goes back to, I think many of these are not necessarily true addictions. These are symptoms of a neurogenic neurosis, of a neurosis of the human spirit, of a blockage or obstacle in our pursuit to meaning, in our pursuit to connection, our pursuit for love, that when we don't know how to acquire these things, to connect these things in a healthy way, it is just too easy in our times to turn to different forms of addiction. You may have heard me say before, I wrapped up a recent book, I believe it's Slingerman or Slingerland's book, Drunk, The History of Alcohol in Modern Civilization. And there's probably about 200 pages there, how alcohol and cannabis, well, mostly alcohol, we'll stay away from cannabis in this episode. Alcohol was a very positive thing for 10 to 12,000 years that not only impacted, but greatly accelerated the growth of civilization, the growth of connection, the dissolution of warring tribes into nations, because it was moderated, managed, and dosable. Alcohol a few thousands of years ago, just a few hundred years ago, was 3 to 4% alcohol by volume, very minor in today's comparison. And even then, often watered down purposefully. If the pub was getting too rowdy, they would water down the ale. If the wedding was getting out of control, they would water down the wine. And there was usually some kind of masters of ceremony. These were done in social situations, right? So you were social. So you tried not to get out of hand to embarrass yourself. And there was often in most cultures, there was some kind of master of ceremonies, a bartender, a barkeep that would decide, okay, we're getting a little out there. We need to water things down. I just saw an episode of a show I'm watching. Thanks to all those friends that recommended it. The Last Kingdom, spectacular. Oh, I can't tell you enough. I am hooked, and now I have to slow down because it's almost over. But it really hit me because there was a point where they were celebrating the triumph of something, and I remember hearing somebody say, "That's it. We're going to have to water down the ale." I'm like, "Oh, that really did happen." The show took place in 900 AD. We've been doing things like that literally for thousands of years. The problem came when we started to distill alcohol. We took out water content, we increased potency 10, 20, 30, 100 times over to, now we have spirits of 30 and 40 and 50, even 90% alcohol by volume. And then also we took it out of the social constraints of having a good time in the pub or at a gathering together, and we started drinking it at home. These distilled spirits, intense forms of alcohol on our own. Why do we drink on our own? Because we feel miserable, right? For men, because we are repressing, we are avoiding, we are in that existential vacuum, that neurogenic neurosis of not knowing where to go in life. But we always have free will to fall back on. We always have a choice, even in the thralls of true addiction. biochemical hooks of opiate addiction, of alcohol addiction, and even worse, of benzodiazepine addiction. That's right, you can get addicted to Xanax, Valium, Ativan, those prescription drugs, even when the chemical hooks are in, or we have triggered our own dopamine hooks through buying or porn or gambling, right? Even then, at some point, we still have free will to do something different, to listen to somebody else, to seek the help of a Dr. Dan or Dr. B or Dr. Elise or the Meaning Academy or anybody in our community. There are thousands of mental health counselors and specialists in these areas. Find one that works for you and with you, even in the strongest addiction. I believe, as Dr. Frankl teaches us, life has meaning under all circumstances, even the most miserable. And so when struggling with these issues, when struggling with issues of mental health or spiritual health or neurogenic neurosis, everybody has a choice. You have a choice to move from this podcast, to contact one of us to ask for help. I don't care where you are. We know a way to connect you with somebody that can be helpful. And if it's not you, I think I've come to realize in our worlds today, if, addiction in its many forms is everywhere. I remember coming out of grad school not that long ago, but a very long time ago, thinking, and even sometimes my wife today thinks like, oh, as a addictions counselor, you're treating that poor homeless person on the corner drinking out of a brown bag. It's not true at all. Addiction takes many forms and impacts. I don't know, maybe I'm too bold in saying, but it impacts damn near everybody. If you're not struggling yourself in some minor or major way, somebody close to you is, or somebody in your community is, somebody that you can have an impact on is struggling. Even in our struggles, life has meaning under all circumstances, even in our greatest struggles. And it's our duty to turn our struggles into achievement. That is what Dr. Frankl tells us. So this is one of the things I don't know if I was going to be able to weave this in here today or not, but I did. Here it comes. How do you know, going back to the gentleman I've been working with this week, that we can't quite find the diagnosis other than a spiritual neurosis. So if you don't know your own diagnosis, how do you find the right therapist to work with? How do you find the right coach or guide or shaman or whatever we want to call them? Well, you have to find the exact, everybody has to be a logotherapist, right? I wish. Not enough of us out there, as was proved in last week's World Congress. And those of us that are out there, we're trying to find ways to help more people in bigger ways, as you see at your Search for Meaning at the Viktor Frankl Meaning Academy. How do you find the right individual person to work with? Is it based on the right technique, the right theory, the exact right training? It's funny. This goes back to a few weeks ago working with a young therapist who actually was a student of mine, who now is struggling with their own existential crisis, saying, God, I've studied this and I got a credential in that, and I focused, I took a year to go into this area of study, and I just don't feel like I'm giving the people I work with the very best that they need. And this has always been my belief, but definitely been fortified over 25 years of clinical and coaching experience. It's not about that. It's not about what technique what theory I mean, you have to know how to best help people. You have to know good ways to help people. But as research tells us, and as Dr. Frankl reminded me as I was reviewing The Will to Meaning, it's not about those things. It's about the ability to connect on a deep level, on a spiritual level, on a noetic level, whatever we want to call it. It's the belief that sitting next to me, sitting across from me, sitting on a screen 1,000 miles away from me, this person I can have a conversation with, I can share deep things about myself, and I believe that they're able to help me. And for some of us, that might take some time. I will be the first to tell you that there are some of us out there that aren't as good at helping some people as others, right? And, many therapists are their own broken people, and that's why they go into therapy as well. Don't get me wrong. By no means am I perfect. I have my issues as well. But a good therapist is always working on their own issues, always seeking to grow, and at the very least can connect and knows enough about theory and practice to be able to offer some kind of guidance. And as a consumer, as a client, as a patient, If you feel you're not getting what you need out of psychotherapy, out of counseling, out of coaching, whatever it might be, find somebody else. A true professional will not be hurt, will not be sad, will not be angry. In fact, ethically, they should volunteer to help you. Yes, I will definitely help you find somebody else. I am sorry this is not working for you. I commend you on speaking up and saying that you needed something different. Let's see what we can find for you. And that may take a couple times, right? I have had clients come in for a few sessions and decide I'm going to move on to somebody else. And I respect that. And I give a referral. And then I've had clients that, my favorite story, young man I worked with back when I was a baby therapist and when my ideas about substance abuse treatment were pretty poorly formed. Um, got to work with this guy and his family when he was 16 or 17. And now I think it's about 20 years later, I get to work with him again, right? Because there was a connection there. He said, you know what, I need help and I think this guy can help me. I've joked recently with some clients, when they've asked for extra sessions or, hey, can you meet me at this, meet with me at this ridiculous time? So you know what? Only you being in the 10-year club will get that. And I kind of chuckled like, holy cow. I have some people that have been with me on and off. I don't see anybody 10 years every week for 10 years, but because I, base my practice more on a relational model than a medical model, there are people that come back every once in a while. Hey, I'm struggling with this part of life. We all have struggles at different times in life. And it's an honor for me that, some people choose to come back and ask for help. It's an honor for me that you choose to listen to this podcast. I hope you share it with others. If you've been here enough to find it helpful and for some reason you keep coming back, please let other people know about it. I continue to see the Meaning Project grow. We continue to see the Viktor Frankl Meaning Academy grow. As you've heard us say, we know this is an idea whose time has come. We hope to continue to share in more and bigger ways, truly believing that the idea that started with one man and an idea that was fortified through the hell of the Nazi concentration camps can definitely be a healing salve in the difficult times that humankind faces now. So again, please share, please pass it on. You're welcome to provide feedback. You can always find out more about me. You know where it's at, danielafranz.com. That's DANIELAFRANZ.com. Check us out. The team that is not here with me today, Dr. Elise, Dr. B, Scott Schaffman, and all those that we have coming on board at the Meaning Academy. You can find out more at themeaningacademy.com. As always, it's my pleasure to provide a little bit of mental health and meaning to your day. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to do so. Take care.